Hey everyone, this is Michael again, and welcome to the AEW Dynamite review. And Dynamite tonight, it was a taped show because it was taped on Chris Jericho's cruise, which was cool. And the show tonight, I thought it was a good show, despite a little bit of censoring that I heard and saw on the show tonight. Like if anybody in the crowd was like swearing, saying curse words, they would blank it out, and like 1 second later, it would blank it out. It just got annoying though. But what can you do? But show was good tonight for a tape show. We crowned new AEW World Tag Team Champions. We also saw the Inner Circle versus the Jurassic Express, 6-man tag. MJF versus Joey Janela. And in the main event, we saw Jon Moxley versus Pac. The winner of that match will get to face Jericho for the AEW World Championship at AEW Revolution. But overall, it was a good show. So let's get started with the Dynamite review. And I liked how the way Dynamite opened, where the set on the cruise ship looked awesome. Had a panorama of all the fans that were there in attendance on the cruise. Just watching the show. And Dynamite kicked off with Hangman Adam Page and Kenny Omega versus SCU. Of course, Frank Kazarian and Scorpio Sky. AEW World Tag Team Championship was on the line. And this was a good match. Really enjoyed it. Back and forth between these teams. We saw Frank Kazarian and Hangman Adam Page start off the match. They went back and forth with some moves, and Frank Kazarian ended up doing a side headlock to Hangman Adam Page, and hit a double lariat, and Scorpio Sky ends up tagging in, ends up chopping away at Kenny Omega. And we had a point in the match where we saw Hangman fights off SCU, both Frank Kazarian and Scorpio Sky. They end up getting sent into the corner, and he ends up hitting a big lariat on Frank Kazarian, which looked awesome. And at the end of the match, Hangman Adam Page, Kenny Omega win it. Hangman ends up hitting a buckshot lariat to Frankie Kazarian. So there you go. Hangman Adam Page and Kenny Omega win the match, and they are your new AEW World Tag Team Champions, which is awesome. Really like how the way they did this. But still, doesn't rule out a Hangman Adam Page heel turn. Doesn't rule that out. He could still, turn heel. But post-match, the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson, came out. They were celebrating with Hangman and Omega. Hangman leaves the ring. We see him drinking beer with the fans. And people in the crowd, they lift Hangman up. He was drinking more beer. And both Matt and Nick Jackson looked annoyed at that. Hangman ends up getting moved on the way to the stage because the fans were just holding him up, and they were holding him up so that he could get to the stage. And Kenny Omega, we saw him pointing to Hangman, ends up nodding his head. And that's what happened post-match. But good opening match to Dynamite tonight. The crowd was really into this match. They really enjoyed it. And it was awesome. Awesome seeing Hangman and Omega win the World Tag Team Championship. And I saw one of my friends actually is on the cruise ship that was seen on the show tonight. One of my friends actually sat floor seat on the hard cam side, and it was really awesome, to see him on sitting floor, on the hard cam side. So he must have had a blast on that cruise. Then we had the women's match. Britt Baker versus Priscilla Kelly. This was awful. This match was terrible. Britt Baker got the win. Mandible claw on Priscilla Kelly. Britt Baker wins the match. I mean, there was a point where Priscilla Kelly delivers a boot to Britt Baker. Britt Baker didn't even sell it. She actually botched it. So, but Britt Baker still ended up winning. Post-match, we had Tony Schiavone. He comes into the ring, ends up striking an interview with Britt Baker. Tony Schiavone ended up saying that the end of the match was questionable. He ended up saying, but it was a good win, nonetheless. So Britt Baker gets on the mic. She ended up saying that Tony doesn't need him to judge her, and that he's a good guy. That Tony Schiavone is a good guy. She ended up saying, before Tony Schiavone worked for AEW, he was just a shitty barista at Starbucks, which the crowd ended up booing her. So Britt Baker ends up telling the crowd that she's a role model. And of course, we all know that she is also a dentist. We all know that. She also ends up saying that she's the best looking woman on the boat. So she ended up talking trash to Tony Schiavone still. And then Jim Ross, good old JR, ends up cutting that off, sending us to the commercial. And this whole promo from Britt Baker was just cringe. It was terrible. And even JR knew, Britt Baker, talking on the mic. Even he thought it was probably terrible because he ended up getting on and saying, "Oh, we're going to commercial." So even that he knew that she's not that great on the mic. All in all, it was terrible. Match was terrible also. Then we had a six-man tag. Santana, Ortiz, and Chris Jericho, the Inner Circle. Sammy Guevara did not appear, but Jericho had Jake Hager, of course, by his side as he came out. So it was the Inner Circle versus the Jurassic Express. Marco Stunt, Luchasaurus, and Jungle Boy. Six-man tag. Very fun six-man tag match. Back and forth between them. I really did enjoy when Jericho came out and the crowd was singing along to his song. So that was really awesome. And crowd ends up saying, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris chant from the crowd broke out because, of course, this is on his, cruise. So you got to give appreciation to Jericho. This is his cruise, and he could do whatever he wants on it. So the match started off with Jericho and Jungle Boy. Jericho ended up slapping Jungle Boy in the face, and Jungle Boy then came back, started throwing strikes at Jericho, drop kicking Jericho. Jericho then we saw him cower in the corner. Ortiz ends up coming in, tags in, and he ends up avoiding Jungle Boy's drop kick. Crowd was chanting, the best, with Jungle Boy. And Luchasaurus ends up tagging in, lays a big boot to Ortiz. And we got, pretty good offense from the Jurassic Express. So Marco Stunt ended up coming in. He ends up throwing his life preserver that he wore into the crowd. And he gets, a hit in, tags back in Jungle Boy. Jungle Boy's laying a couple of chops at Ortiz. Luchasaurus ends up coming back in, tags in, ends up striking to Ortiz. And then we had a Luchasaurus chant, ends up breaking out, because Luchasaurus ended up delivering a big boot to Santana, who was in. And there was a point in the match where it was Jungle Boy and Ortiz in the ring. And the crowd was chanting, all that hair, which was funny. And, we had Santana and Ortiz. They were in the ring. They end up delivering a double elbow drop. Ortiz end up hitting a diving splash. And towards the end of the match, Jericho and Marco Stunt was in the ring. Marco Stunt ended up trying to deliver, pins. Jericho ended up kicking out of them. And then Jericho ends the match, hitting the Judas Effect to Marco Stunt. 1, 2, 3. And there you go. Jericho, Santana, and Ortiz, the Inner Circle, win the match. And forgot to mention, Jake Hager, ended up getting involved. And Luchasaurus ends up, throwing punches away at Jake Hager, swinging Hager all the way to the back. So, all in all, very fun 6-man tag. And then, after that, we saw MJF versus Joey Janela. MJF comes out, and during the commercial, the split screen commercial, we actually saw MJF get in the ring. He approaches Justin Roberts, and he wants Justin Roberts to kiss his AEW ring. Justin Roberts is shown, kissing the ring, which, makes MJF happy. Wardlow wasn't on the cruise with MJF. And commentary ended up saying that the only reason why Wardlow is not on the cruise is because he's training for the steel cage match that he's going to have with Cody Rhodes. So then Joey Janela, was out there. Match gets underway, which was a pretty, decent match. The match ended up starting off with both MJF and Joey Janela in wrist locks. Then they end up hitting a side headlocks. MJF ends up trying to go for a handshake to Joey Janela. Janela slaps MJF's hand away. And because of that, that pissed off MJF. MJF ended up spitting in Joey Janela's face. And then he ends up getting slapped. Joey Janela slaps MJF. So then Joey Janela ends up sending MJF into the ropes. MJF hangs on and goes to the ramp, almost goes to the back, wanted nothing to do with Joey Janela. But Janela ended up coming out of the ring, stops MJF. MJF goes for the rake of the eyes on Janela. So MJF ends up charging at Janela, but Janela ends up back body dropping MJF back into the ring. Janela ended up heading to the top rope. MJF rolled out of the way. And both Janela and MJF ended up on the top rope. Joey Janela then ended up hitting a superplex from the top to MJF, which looked really cool. And so Janela went for the cover. MJF kicked out. And then we see Kip Sabian and Penelope Ford. Of course, Penelope Ford is Janela's ex-girlfriend. And so them two are on the stage and they start making out. Both Kip Sabian and Penelope Ford. So this distracted Joey Janela. Janela tried to go for the elbow drop. MJF moved out of the way. And then MJF ended up taking control. Ends up hitting a double cross on Joey Janela to score the win. So there you go. MJF ends up winning the match. But overall, match itself, it was decent. And then post-match, we had MJF. He gets on the mic. MJF ends up telling the crowd they love him. And they definitely love Cody. He wanted to say last week, Cody was pretty much a poet with his words. So he also ended up saying that, Cody's saying that MJF was just another chapter in his book. And MJF ends up letting Cody that will be the last chapter. So then Cody's music ended up hitting. Cody came out. MJF ends up telling Cody not to come any closer. And MJF reminded Cody that he can't touch him. Because if Cody ends up touching MJF, all bets are off. So MJF then goes and makes fun of Cody's lisp. And MJF ends up saying that he knows Cody wants to talk. And MJF ends up dropping the mic. And Cody ends up going to take the mic. So Cody picks up the mic. MJF kicks the mic away. And he heads to the ramp. MJF ends up heading to the ramp. Cody gets on the mic. Ended up saying that MJF is right. He can't touch him. But he says he knows someone who can. So then the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson, come out. Matt and Nick Jackson sneak up from behind and they lay a double super kick to MJF. Both Matt and Nick end up hitting super kicks to MJF. So then this was one of the best parts of this segment right here. I really enjoyed it right here. This was funny. I was laughing. So Matt and Nick end up taking MJF to the pool that they had there. So they drag MJF and throw him into the pool, which was hilarious. And you heard, I think it was either Matt or Nick ends up going and saying, "Oh, MJF, he can't swim, he can't swim," and they start laughing. It was funny. It was hilarious. And then you hear a little bit of the crowd go, "You can't swim," and then it cuts away. And it cuts away backstage to Tony Schiavone. But really enjoyed that. Really loved when Matt and Nick threw MJF into the pool. Then after that, we went backstage. Tony Schiavone was talking and interviewing with the new AEW World Tag Team Champions, Kenny Omega and Hangman Adam Page. He ends up interviewing them about winning the titles. Kenny Omega ended up telling Tony Schiavone that they did something special today and that he couldn't be happier. And Hangman ended up saying, when I said I'm going to whoop both their ass, I'm going to whoop their asses. So Tony Schiavone ended up going right back to Kenny Omega and he asked him about Pac. So Kenny Omega ended up saying in time he will give Pac his match. But the AEW World Tag Team Championship, is his top priority. So with Kenny Omega saying that, we saw Hangman, seem a little bothered by that. So Matt and Nick come in, they celebrate with Kenny Omega and also Hangman. Hangman ends up saying that he's surprised they won the titles before, Matt and Nick won them. So with Hangman saying that, both Matt and Nick seemed a little annoyed. And so we saw Kenny Omega end up trying to smooth it over a little bit. So, but those are just, the little seeds planted for Hangman's heel turn. Those are just little planted seeds there. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. We're going to see Hangman, turn heel. It's coming. So those were just little planted seeds there. And then it was announced, it was a good, little interview with Tony Schiavone and, Hangman and Kenny Omega. And then it was announced next week that on next week's Dynamite, it's going to be Private Party and Darby Allin versus Chris Jericho, Santana, and Ortiz. Of course, the Inner Circle. Also, it was also announced that we're going to see Matt and Nick, the Young Bucks, versus the Butcher and the Blade. And then also we're going to see Kip Sabian versus Cody Rhodes. And then, those are the matches that we're going to see next week on Dynamite. Private Party and Darby Allin versus the Inner Circle. That could be a really awesome match. Young Bucks versus the Butcher and the Blade. I could see the Young Bucks winning that. That would possibly be another loss for the Butcher and the Blade. Kip Sabian versus Cody. Going with Cody Rhodes. Those are my predictions. And then we had the main event. Pac versus Jon Moxley. Number one contender to face Chris Jericho for the AEW World Championship. And Jericho ends up coming out on commentary here. He's out on commentary with Jim Ross and Excalibur. And going back to when Jericho won the match earlier in the night with Santana and Ortiz, when they defeated Jurassic Express. Of course, I knew Jericho and the Inner Circle was going to win because, of course, this is on Jericho's ship. Jericho's cruise. So there was no way that Jericho was going to lose that match. Even though it was on his cruise. So Jericho came out on commentary, joined JR and Excalibur. So Pac ended up coming out first, and then Jon Moxley, which he came through the crowd. Moxley still had his eye bandaged after, if you remember last week when Jericho ended up taking that spike on his jacket and jabbed it into Moxley. And we saw Moxley's having some vision problems, and he got some strikes in to Pac. And this was a pretty decent main event. Even though the outcome, I knew it was predictable going into before going into this. I knew Jon Moxley was going to win it. So, but Pac ended up laying some elbows to Jon Moxley's eye. Moxley ends up coming back, chopping at Pac. Moxley ended up hitting a German suplex to Pac. And we hear Jericho end up saying, it's not his fault what happened to Moxley. Because Moxley ended up smashing Jericho over the head, with the bottle 2 weeks ago on Dynamite. Which, Moxley ended up swerving the Inner Circle, which the Inner Circle thought that, Moxley, was joining them. Which, he didn't. He swerved them. And, Pac was shown throwing shots to Moxley's face. Referee was checking on Moxley. And we saw the crowd was chanting, "Your ship sucks" to Jericho. And Jericho ended up saying, "Oh, it's because another ship is pulling into, the port," which was funny. So Pac was, hitting another shot to Moxley's eye. And then towards the end of the match, we had Pac ends up ripping the bandage off of Moxley. And Pac is just throwing punches to that eye of Moxley that was bandaged up. Moxley ends up getting up, hits a inside cradle, gets a 2 count, and then Moxley comes back, hits the paradigm shift, and there you go. Moxley ends up winning the match. Moxley is going to face Jericho for the AEW World Championship. That's going to be taking place at Revolution. So, it was predictable. Knew Moxley was going to face Jericho because this feud that they're having, Moxley and Jericho, very good. Really enjoying this little feud that they're having. So the outcome, predictable, but in the end, Pac versus Moxley came off as a decent match. It was a decent main event. And then you had post-match, Jericho from the commentary table. He was staring at Moxley, and he ends up holding up the AEW World Championship, and Dynamite went off the air. So anyways, that's it for my AEW Dynamite review. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed this review. And definitely give the video a thumbs up, comment, subscribe. And until next video, I'll see you all later.